Man, I really enjoy this game. As someone who's wanted to play Rocket League for a long time, but doesn't like supporting subscription fees just to play online, and also doesn't have a PC that could run such a game, I was really happy when I first turned on Disc Jam. I had PlayStation Plus for a few months, which was given to me by a friend, so that we could play co-op in games like Dark Souls 3. I almost skipped Disc Jam when I realized that it was one of the free games. Something about the icon felt almost like a mobile game, which just wasn't the sort of thing I wanted to play at the moment. But since it took up so little space, I said screw it and I downloaded it anyway. Boy am I glad that I did. If there's one game I got free from PlayStation Plus that I miss right now, because I don't have Plus any longer, it's Disc Jam. But why? Well, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's get the obligatory facts out of the way. Disc Jam was developed by High Horse Entertainment and was released on the PS4 on March 7th of 2017. Disc Jam is essentially Pong, but with a very wide, fixed third-person viewpoint, and it utilizes discs instead of squares masquerading as circles. Disc Jam is actually extremely similar to an arcade title from the mid-90s known as Windjammers. Clearly, Windjammers was the direct inspiration for Disc Jam, because really the only core difference are the scoring system and the perspective, since Windjammers relies on a top-down viewpoint. So why was I comparing Disc Jam to Rocket League up top then? Well, part of it is because both are indie titles that were initially released for free on PlayStation Plus. Part of it is because they're both sports games with a bit of a crazy flair that makes them feel more like a competitive arcade game than a simulation of a traditional sport. And part of it is because both of them take an extremely simple concept and refine it to the point that they have endlessly deep mechanics. Unfortunately, I don't think Disc Jam will be the next Rocket League. It may be doing extremely well, I'm not sure. But I think the one thing Rocket League had that seems to be missing from Disc Jam is the YouTube/Twitch stream push. It really sucks, because I think this game could catch fire just like Rocket League, if it could capture the same pseudo-esports streaming audience, and maybe it will. Disc Jam is mechanically a rather simple game. To begin, you've got a selection of 4 different characters to play as. Everything else from your disc choice to your clothing is purely aesthetic, but character choice is not. Each character has different properties that give them distinct advantages and disadvantages. Gator is generally the all-rounder, who doesn't seem to excel at anything but has no major weaknesses either. Stanton is extremely slow and lacks much ability to manipulate the disc, but throws the disc really hard and has a mean slide. McKenna is fast, but throws slow. Her biggest boon though is definitely how crazy hard she can curve the disc. In my experience, Haruka is the secretly OP character for those who like to play the long game. Haruka's throws are rather slow, meaning it's easy for the opponent to rally. Her disc control seems average, though her running speed and slide are extremely quick, meaning she can rally just as easily against her opponents. In the hands of a player who's okay with waiting for an opponent's mistake, she can dominate. She can rack up huge rally chains and then punish mistakes for big points. But if your opponent capitalizes on your own mistakes, all that work is turned against you. It makes Haruka the odd one out, the big risk, big reward type of character. Aesthetic options like different discs, different clothing, avatar icons, and title cards can be unlocked for free simply by playing the game. Every time you get 1,000 credits, the player can pull the lever on a toy dispenser machine, which will give them a random aesthetic thing to use. Any doubles can be immediately traded in for an amount of credits based on the rarity of the item. As far as I could tell, there were no microtransaction options, meaning it essentially works like the trophy system in Smash Bros. Melee, just with a better refund policy. It's legitimately an old-school unlock system in that way. Mode options in Disc Jam are slim, but more than adequate. You've got public and private singles and doubles matches, with doubles taking place on a larger core and allowing teammates to pass the disc before returning it. There's a tutorial, free practice mode, and local multiplayer. Again, not a ton of options, but I was never left wanting for more, though a skill shot minigame mode like you often find in billiards games would have been sweet. Once you get into a match, you've got 5 basic types of throws you can use, with the game then adding other secondary mechanics on top of that, which the player can take advantage of if they know how. As soon as the player catches the disc, they have 4 of the 5 options at their disposal. The first option is a straight throw, which can be done at any angle based on where you aim the stick. The second is a curved shot, which can be done manually by rotating the stick as you throw it, or done automatically by pressing L2 or R2. Third is a lob, where the player tosses the disc high into the air, rather than throwing it. Finally, there's a shot that ricochets off the wall repeatedly due to the extra sharp spin the player puts on the disc. Throwing the disc right as you catch it counts as a perfect return. This is shown through pink particle effects. These throws are faster than normal, and if the player does at least 3 in a row, every subsequent perfect in the chain is even faster. There's one more type of shot, the super, but it can only be initiated in 2 ways. The player can charge up their shield, at which point if the disc hits the shield while it's fully charged, their next throw will be a super. The other way to do super is to stay standing under an opponent's lob for long enough. Just like with normal shots, the player has several options with supers. L2 or R2 both perform a shot that spins the disc toward the wall. The disc then sticks to the wall while flying toward the opponent's goal. Pressing the lob button does an extremely quick lob toward the back of your opponent's half of the court. The normal throw button can initiate one of 3 types of unique supers that you can choose at the main menu. One rotates in a circular fashion, one goes in a zigzag motion, and one makes several 90-degree turns along the way. Initially, you might be inclined to think that supers are rather overpowered by looking at them, but they're risky for several reasons if you're against a good opponent. First of all, if your opponent catches your super and then gets a perfect return throw, they'll throw a super right back. Initiating a super can also be rather risky. Getting under lobbed throws for long enough is kind of difficult, but trying to use your shield to initiate a super lowers the player's maneuverability significantly. You'd better be sure that you have the right angle on the incoming throw, or it'll soar right by you. Also, if you don't completely get the shield charged, you won't get a super. Instead, the disc will still fly in the air, but it'll be at a wild angle that requires you to chase after it. All of these mechanics are extremely easy to grasp, easy to use, but difficult to master. The skill of a player really comes down to consistency first, perception at near second, and the ability to keep your opponent on their toes at a distant third. I've found that focusing on getting perfect throws and baiting players into making throws that are easy to counter with supers or lobs is the best way to get ahead of the competition early. But with all this in mind, you might be asking exactly how the player wins a game anyway. To win a match, the player has to get to 50 points. First to win 2 matches wins the set or the game. Points are calculated based on the rally combo. The initial serve starts the potential score off at 5 points. If this gets past your opponent, this automatically doubles to give you 10 free points. If the opponent successfully rallies, then the score instead goes up by 1 to 6. Each rally adds 1 more point to the tally until the disc gets past one of the players. The player who won the serve is then awarded all of the points. This means that if the disc keeps going back and forth, it's possible for the whole entire game to end after just 1 serve. If that sounds confusing, it really isn't. You'll grasp it rather quickly. As far as other mechanics, really the only other one is the use of your shield. As already explained, the shield can be used to create openings to use a super attack, but it can also allow the player to get just a bit more time to rally if the opponent has the momentum currently. Like I said earlier, hitting the disc with an uncharged shield causes it to fly in the air at a random angle. If unexpected, this can often end with you panicking and missing the disc entirely. But if you're prepared, this gives you an extra split second to breathe before sending the disc back. It can also make perfect returns easier to perform. One other thing the shield can do is net returns, which are extremely difficult to counter. If the player is really close to the net when they shield an opponent's throw, this will essentially counter with a really short, low lob, almost always guaranteeing that you win the rally. The final mechanic that's worth mentioning is that if the player isn't facing the disc when it reaches them, it can hit them in the back, knocking them over. At this point, you have lost the rally. That's rather simple, though the best counter to this if you're having trouble with it is to always dash at the disc before you catch it. Dashing at the disc makes it impossible for the disc to knock you over. Not to mention it makes judging your opponent's throw angles just a bit simpler. Surprisingly, most of my interactions in Disc Jam have been really respectful. As far as I know, the game doesn't allow for voice chat in public games. Either that, or I just so happen to play 150 plus games without ever running into a single player with a mic. Instead, the player can use the directional pad to say several preset phrases in text chat, with 4 categories to choose from. Most people either didn't use chat, or if they did, they tended to focus on more positive comments. Regardless, most of the comments on offer are mildly cheeky at best and don't come off as genuinely insulting. This helped make my experience with Disc Jam an extremely positive one, where players at your level felt genuinely engaged, players above you felt almost like mentors, and players below you felt like chances to groom better competitors for later matches. There were points where I would play 5 to 7 games straight with a single competitor and it never got stale. Instead, you really got the chance to learn the ins and outs of both your weaknesses and those of your opponents, leading to better and better games as you continued to play them. It's a lot like Dark Souls in that way, where it's really difficult to actually be insulting to people. The biggest weakness of the gameplay itself really comes down to the lack of skill-based matchmaking at launch though. Since there were closed betas and such pre-release, in the beginning you occasionally came across players who were extremely good, and dominated unquestionably. But just the same, there were times where I would run across players who clearly skipped the tutorial, which is an effective tutorial that only takes like 5 minutes tops, and would just spam extremely slow stray shots, making for really boring matches. I very, very rarely came across trolly players who would do things like spam lob shots and whatnot. But even when I did, the game is so well balanced that I always felt more than equipped to deal with it. Not one tactic is massively superior to all the others, so any reasonably competent player can counter a troll extremely easily. This keeps the amount of trolls really low, and often causes trolls to try and play legit mid-match. My absolute favorite part about Disc Jam is how deep it is. It's a game that excels at allowing the player to focus purely on performing well, with an enormous skill ceiling. Let's take the curved shot as an example of just a tiny bit of the depth that this game can provide. As I said earlier, the player can curve a shot manually by rotating the stick, or they can just press L2 or R2. Though one might initially see these as the same, they provide subtle options to the player that they wouldn't have otherwise. Manually curving the disc gives the player a lot more nuance in how sharply they curve the shot. While holding a direction as you do a trigger button curve can change how sharp the curve is as well, it doesn't seem to have the nuance or breadth that a manual curve has. However, it benefits from being much easier to time than a manual curve, meaning maintaining a streak of perfect throws is a simpler task. These are the type of things that you'll eventually know so well that you can make an informed decision within the split second before you catch the disc. My favorite tactic personally, if my opponent seems to be weak when it comes to doing perfect throws, is that I slowly close in on the net as we play, meaning they get less and less time to respond to my returns. I generally focus on really simple shots when doing this so that I can ensure perfect throws, making it yet more difficult for them to return properly. This puts the pressure on my opponent while simultaneously racking up a big score for when I make my move. As far as I'm concerned, Disc Jam really only has one major weakness. Its presentation. Performance is fantastic. Gameplay is fantastic. The community so far seems fantastic. And the game looks fine graphically, but the character designs, color choices, and overall aesthetic left me wanting. It simultaneously looks rather generic and kind of ugly. Sound effects are fantastic though, and are a key component to knowing which type of throw your opponent is doing in time to counter. The effects are meaty and distinct. I just wish the game wasn't so goofy and ugly. It partially looks like a wacky party game with the dance emotes and ridiculous clothing options, and it partially looks like the type of game that almost wants to be taken seriously as an esport or something. This isn't by any means a damning death blow to the game. It's still fantastic regardless. Whether you got it for free from PlayStation Plus, or you need to spend the $15 it costs to own outright, I definitely recommend Disc Jam to anyone looking for a great competitive game. Hey, Thanks for watching this video. If you're interested in another one, here's the last one that I uploaded. You can also follow me on Twitter or subscribe by hitting the subscribe button.